Recently in the YouTube comments, I've been having a discussion with someone about fractures in the spine, and if there's a point where it's too late to do anything about them. In this video, we are going to talk about this in more depth and look at what the research says. I think it's full of hope. If you're new here, I'm Sarah. Welcome to my YouTube channel, where we discuss all things related to bone health. I'm a 500-hour trained yoga teacher with training that's specific to yoga and osteoporosis. I trained with Dr. Lauren Fishman, and I'm also BoneFit certified and a nutritional health coach through the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I help people to improve their bone health through living a bone healthy lifestyle that includes a bone healthy diet and exercise that's been specifically designed for better bone health. Let's dive into looking at the issue of compression fractures and if there's a point of no return. Compression fractures in the spine are the #1 most common osteoporotic fracture. When we think about compression fractures, it's easy to write them off and not consider them particularly serious. A hip fracture is what we typically think of as the big bad fracture. And make no mistake, having a hip fracture is a big bad fracture that can have huge consequences. The statistics on hip fractures are not good. 25% of people who have a hip fracture die within a year of the fracture, and another 25% go into a nursing home and never come out again. That means that 50% of the people who have a hip fracture are never okay again. That's terrible. And the reason why we think of hip fracture as the big bad fracture. It's also a reason why balance is so important to work on daily. Balance helps to reduce the likelihood of having a fall, and if we reduce the chance of having a fall, we also reduce the risk of fracturing. At any rate, I have digressed from the topic of the spine and compression fractures. But understanding how serious hip fractures are helps to give some background for looking at compression fractures in the spine. Compression fractures are not generally considered a terrible fracture with serious consequences, but the statistics there are more nuanced and somewhat hidden. When a person has a series of compression fractures, they may develop permanent kyphosis, which has a hunchback or rounded over shape of the spine and also a forward head posture. This posture puts pressure on both the heart and the lungs. So people don't develop morbidity directly from the compression fractures. Instead, they develop increased morbidity from pulmonary complications because they are unable to breathe fully and appropriately. Oxygen in the blood also becomes limited at this point. So is this the point of no return? Is hope lost at this point? The answer is not necessarily. There are still things that can be done even at this point that can make a significant difference. I'm going to share quotes from 2 medical studies that were done looking at people with permanent kyphosis who did exercises to open up the thoracic section that holds our heart and lungs. These study findings suggest that doing exercises to open up through the thoracic section helps to improve the ability to breathe, which in turn affects our quality of life and reduces potential morbidity. This does not mean that a person with permanent kyphosis will magically be able to get rid of their kyphosis, but it does mean that their health can be improved and their quality of life along with it. To me, this is a message full of hope. A side note here that's important to include is that a person with permanent kyphosis who does not have osteoporosis is at the same risk for having pressure put on their internal organs, and they also have an increased risk for falls and fractures because this posture creates limited mobility and decreased balance. The reason for discussing the seriousness of this issue is that there are still positive things that we can do with our lifestyle choices at any point in time to make a positive difference in our lives. There is no point of no return. You may be wondering what it means to open up through the thoracic section of the spine. Both lateral motion and extension help to open up through the spine. Lateral motion is when we lean our bodies over to each side, and extension happens when we create space in the spine. These movements could happen from reaching our arms over to one side and then the other, or by reaching our arms up overhead. When someone has permanent kyphosis, these movements may not be easy to do. I'm going to attempt to demonstrate what these movements might look like with permanent kyphosis. So to model permanent kyphosis and what these movements might look like, I'm going to bring my spine into a rounded shape. Naturally, my head comes further forward. I'm going to turn my body so that you can see what this shape looks like. So when I try and bring my head back, it just doesn't go. So it's going to be really difficult to try and reach my arms up overhead. It just doesn't happen. But anytime that I'm reaching and reaching, it still helps to open up. Another option would be to work with a medical professional and to use traction to help expand this posture. You might also try laying down on your belly, even if it's just on your bed, to reach your arms up overhead. The other motion, the lateral motion, the side to side motion, when I reach my arm up overhead, you'll notice I'm still in this rounded shape. My head is still further forward, but it's a little bit easier to reach my arm up overhead. Now, it obviously isn't overhead, but it's opening up through my side body, which is what makes this such a wonderful way to open up through the thoracic section. Then when I come over towards the other side, there is opening here. There's real movement. So coming in and doing both of those movements, working to create both extension and lateral motion, help to open up through the thoracic section of the spine, which are both incredibly helpful movements to do when someone has permanent kyphosis. Gradually over time, the body will open up. Pressure on the lungs can be relieved, and it makes a difference. I hope that this discussion is helpful for you and that you have an increased sense of hope for both yourself and for your loved ones. If you know someone who would benefit from this information, please share it with them. I look forward to speaking with you soon.